You were talking about people who are not aware of this kind of numbers or regulations or facts. What is the most common how to say critique of animal experimentation that you are like witnessing or have witnessed throughout your experience at the initiative?
Yeah, so that's interesting because when I was doing science myself, I thought it was all about, or let's say, the main argument of activists that are working against animal research or opponents that voice their concerns is that we, as scientists, do not treat the animals well enough, or that we are torturing them, and being overly cruel, and that the pain is an issue. So that is rather emotional. But what I saw when I came into this job that I have now is that in most of the debate, really, also in the politicians' debate, is the argument that animal research is actually useless. So we were talking about, when do you use animals and why, and under which circumstances, and so on. And there are some groups that really say animal research does not make any sense. You cannot get any scientific results that are meaningful for the human situation because animals are so different from humans that you cannot use that data. They are not predictive, right? So medicine has progressed not because of animal research, but in spite of animal research. So the data is misleading people, and we could have been much better off if we hadn't started using animals in medicine. That's basically the core argument that is being put forward. So basically, it's useless and it's cruel. So why should we do it?
What should we use then for testing or experimenting? What is the argument?
Yeah, so the argument what we should use instead is, of course, other models, the rest of the toolbox. Just spare the animals. And even back in the days, then they would have said, well, if your model is not predictive, then why use it, right? So yeah, that's one of the main. I mean, I see you shaking your head, but it is really highly debated, and there's even you can even find citations and papers on all this that some people who say that we look at the science and we only get driven by data, they say that it's completely useless.
That's complete nuts. I don't know. I mean, I would like to see their arguments scientifically, right, in order to express my educated opinion, right? But in first thought is like, how? Like we just talked about so many things that have been done in animals in order to achieve such success.
Yeah, I think much of the public debate really is about testing, right? Yeah. You use a drug, you put it into a mouse or a rat, and you see an effect. Does this effect translate to humans? And often it doesn't, right? So, I get the idea that you question certain things. For example, easy example that everybody knows about: dogs don't do very well with chocolate. They can die from chocolate if they have too much of it. Humans don't. So, is the dog a predictive model? If you would have tried this compound in a chocolate that makes dogs sick, you would think it's toxic and humans should never touch it. So we wouldn't have chocolate if it was tested on dogs. So see where this is coming from. So there is a, let's say, a valid point behind this. And that's why it's really important to actually know the physiology, the metabolism of the research animals, and to know which animal species you use for which part of research and testing, particularly. But what we've talked about before is much bigger. Is you actually want to see differences. You want to do comparative physiology, anatomy, and so on. You want to learn about things from animal bodies that are maybe not necessarily the same as in human, but in a lot of ways they are very, very similar and comparable. And we want to know exactly the extent of what's similar, what's different, and what can we learn from animals. So the whole research process is much bigger than just simply testing some compound in any arbitrary animal, right?
Yes, and also another aspect is like developing technologies, right? So, like for example, CRISPR-Cas9, which is a very famous Nobel Prize-winning technology about gene editing. It was tested in animals, right? And recently, I don't know if you're aware, there was this article in one of the big UK media outlets about a young child that was cured. I'm not aware if this was a boy or a girl, but let's say a girl, she was able to hear again because of this kind of a gene therapy that was performed on her, right? And this is because this therapy was thoroughly tested in other organisms and animals, right? So yeah, I think this is another aspect. So the testing, the physiology, the fundamental principles of nature, if you want, and then the developing of technologies, which is important also.
Yeah, that's one example, and that's also something, gene therapy is not like a simple drug, right? You need to develop that actually, and what does that even mean? It means, a lot of repetitions, incremental steps, changes to the formulation. Like, how can we actually switch off a gene or switch on a gene or edit the genetics in living cells within an organism? That is something that is not, the same as giving a drug and see whether the animal gets, a toxic effect or a therapeutic effect. So I think this is a great example, and there are so many examples where we can clearly say that this would have not been possible without using animals.